Hi, my name is Samantha Lee, and I am here today to talk about the effects of distance and online learning in an emergency response, which is in our current case the event of COVID-19. The world had been informed about the global pandemic during the beginning of the year 2020 and had made the decision to close down or reduce the hours of certain establishments due to safety concerns. One of the institutions across the world, schools, were shut down and transferred to remote teaching, impacting more than 94% of the world's student population. Today, we will be looking at 4 groups of students across the world and their experiences with online teaching. These groups are New Zealand high school students about to graduate, students ranging from grade 7 to 12 from Slovakia, grade 11 and 12 from Delhi, and students from Bhutan. All these participants were volunteers with no bias that were passed out questionnaires with qualitative and quantitative questions to answer about their experience with online teaching during the pandemic. Not only were students the only one affected by these changes, but teachers were as well. Because of the sudden and demanding changes, teachers and students from everywhere had no choice but to adapt to this new style of teaching and learning that was not familiar to everyone. Distant education theories had always been in development with resources, platforms, and teaching methods that were carefully considered and taken time to develop. However, emergency remote teaching must stay distinct from high-quality online teaching, especially when people are looking at it at a temporary lens. Higher education institutions, universities, and colleges seemed more prepared for the sudden situation and adapted to it more easily compared to primary and secondary schools. The secondary chemistry and science teachers from Slovakia needed to find a way to transfer experiments and laboratories to an online environment. Thankfully, they had the development of modern information and communication technologies to continue creating experiments, focusing on the practical aspects. Even with this backing, these teachers still faced problems. There is a weakness of online teaching as it is not familiar to all teachers, yet they all had no choice but to adapt to this new style of education with little to no alternatives. Some teachers received limited training, and those who were not too familiar with the technology struggled more, requiring more time or taking more time in class. Participants in the New Zealand study valued agency and independence and wanted a choice of selecting what needed more of their time. They liked the flexibility they saw in remote teaching and hoped to see it continue in the classroom when returning back to face-to-face education. The free time made them feel like they were not trapped at school and helped self-directed learning. Only 10% preferred learning at home, making the place of choice school, but hoped for continued control over time. Compared to Slovakia students, 70% of students preferred working at home because they were able to sleep in later and work in a less stressful environment. This may encourage schools to start later if students prefer this time change. The New Zealand students who did prefer home over school complained about distractions in school like disruptive classmates or experienced bullying. For the Delhi students, 46.6% of students favored face-to-face teaching, as 37.8% found the switch to online to be difficult. Even though students were given freedom, some struggled to self-manage as no one was looking over them. This lack of time management resulted in lack of motivation and learning, especially not having the routine of school where students could get up early in the day and take breaks in between. There was also a complaint of increased workload, creating a lack of self-management and coordination. Although the New Zealand students liked their freedom, of the 23% who had choice learned more, and 49% who had less choice learned less. 39% of the New Zealand students cited motivation when asked the hardest part of learning at home. This lack of motivation was linked to issues like family obligations, distractions, and accessibility of help, and a lack of distinction between school and home. Students would be too uncertain with the state of the world to have their complete focus on school. Timing choice is another demotivator. For the Slovakia students, who now had a more comfortable environment, 20% of students complained of a lack of time management and an inability to stay focused. It was difficult to do homework when it was easy for them to leave that behind and choose using their free time doing another activity. In undeveloped countries like Bhutan, parents with children felt like it was acceptable for them to repeat grades. During the long break enforced by the school closure, students were dropping out and opting to discontinue school, seeing that as a better option than attending remote classes. In Bhutan, the majority of learners are from rural villages whose parents were mostly illiterate farmers. These students were encouraged to help their family, especially after having to be home permanently, which made it difficult to keep up with lessons after. Their internet was also costly when compared to their income. A report in Poland, which is near Slovakia, showed about 330,000 students did not have access to a computer connected to the internet. 1,320,000 students had a number of computers in their household lower than the students living there. This resulted in students having to use small screens or mobile devices, or choosing not to participate at all. 30% to 40% of these Delhi students had devices or internet issues. Delhi, compared to other states in India, has better smartphone and internet access. Although mobile devices are smaller, they could be used at all places at any time. Collaboration and online conversations were both for learning and for emotional support. 53% of New Zealand students prefer the familiarity of collaboration from in-person classroom. Those who preferred online collaboration were also the ones who tended to learn more at home. However, 67% thought collaboration was less helpful than in-person classes, and also learned less at home. Less than 10% experienced collaboration that was better than in class. Daily interaction with peers helped make the days more manageable and preferred the proximity to others and the immediacy of support. It also enabled casual conversation. It was easier to attract the attention of others in person rather than finding a convenient time to message peers or teachers and waiting for a response. A feeling of isolation is also connected to the absence of social presence. Learner satisfaction is correlated with social presence, direction instruction, and learning content. 70% of Delhi students felt isolated, while 48.6% felt left out of the online learning experience, even though they attended online classes and participated. Zoom felt unnatural because only one person could talk at a time, which was usually the teacher. Students would turn off their videos and microphones, which caused them to not participate. It was difficult to sit in front of a screen all day with no interaction. Some students reported studying up to 9 hours a day after Zoom calls, which resulted in doing schoolwork all day and all night. Students reported feeling uncomfortable asking questions in class on Zoom or through email. They were demotivated when there was a delay in the teacher's response, which is already an effort of asking a question and waiting. 33% of Slovakia students complained about problems understanding the content. However, they had the inability to ask questions since lessons were too fast-paced. In Bhutan, more students dropped out or opted out of examinations due to reduced contact or consultation of teachers. Leigh Vygotsky, mentioned in the New Zealand study, emphasized the need for social interaction for cognitive development. Earlier studies reveal that school transport and commuting had influenced cognition and educational achievement. It is essential for students to engage in offline activities and self-exploratory learning. It is important to emphasize that, like in-person teaching, there is no one-size-fits-all for online teaching. Different age groups and different subjects require different and multiple approaches. Michael G. Moore, also mentioned in the New Zealand study, says that the only distance between teachers and learning is transactional distance, which is determined by dialogue, structure, and learner's autonomy. Borji Holmberg, another person mentioned in the study, is a European education pioneer who says the only condition needed to successful distance education is empathy. Teachers need to develop a relationship with the students, which will create a sense of belonging in the learning community, which will result in the students' motivation. Teachers need to be supportive by checking in and giving feedback. They should provide resources with clear expectations and time limits. Providing emotional support is important, especially if support networks are limited. They should create a community with additional efforts to engage and analyze the tools that seem to be working. Technical readiness as well as psychological readiness are equally important. More exposure to this style of learning will bring more familiarity. Online platforms can be continued to be explored and used as additional resources. This was an opportunity to teach in innovative ways. This is not limited to the pandemic, as anything unexpected may eventually happen in the future. The only thing teachers can do is be prepared. Some suggest additional hours reteaching when schools reopen, specifically a 2-hour increase per week. Previous studies show an additional hour per week results in test score increasing by 6%. They also question about repeating grades or canceling summer break, but it is not a popular idea. The benefits and results will be different according to the classroom environment, as well as how much funding is provided. We must keep in mind that other factors take into play into the online learning experience. Children from disadvantaged homes or underdeveloped countries like Bhutan would be more affected as they have fewer resources and access. There are social, economic, and health impacts that could be either temporary or permanent. Students from New Zealand were able to return back to school after a few months, while these other participants had no choice but to continue online schooling. The global pandemic has affected everyone and continues to affect people today. Although people are slowly transitioning back into in-person classes, things are no longer the same. People are continuing to do research on this topic since it is fairly new, but the effects and results of staying home while continuing to attend are clear. We can take what we have learned to continue to support students as they deal with other factors in life that we may not think of. These factors may get in the way of their studies. To help these students, we must build a connection with them to provide the best education with communication and adaptability.